Welcome to the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Edufaith Essentials is an educational podcast that provides essential information, resources, and tips about education, leadership, and topics about diverse learners. Diverse learners include students with disabilities who receive services under Section 504 or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, response to intervention and the multi-tiered system of support, English speakers of other languages, and related diverse learner categories. Edufaith Essentials' mission is to bring positive awareness and promote equity and inclusion in education by sharing information and topics about non-traditional learners. Edufaith Essentials' goal is to restore faith in education one student at a time by empowering listeners with knowledge, because we all know that knowledge is power, so let's be powerful. I am your host, Dr. Nakia, sending you good vibes and thanking you for joining me for another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Just want to begin the podcast by reminding everyone the why Edufaith. Edufaith stands for education, EDU, and faith, trusting in one's ability. Find out more information at www.edufaithconsulting.com. Edufaith Educational Services. Let's dive into our episode. We're going to start with our Edufaith inspirational story. And for this story, we're going to fly like eagles, or fly with the eagles, may I say. For our inspirational story, I want to share something I saw on Good Morning America the other day about the Philadelphia Eagles. They are not only Super Bowl champs, but also champions for autism. The Philadelphia Eagles are on a mission to make football accessible to all kids, especially those with autism. On the field, we are united by one objective, victory. Off the field, we are driven by an even larger goal, taking action for autism. Through research, advocacy, empathy, and unity, the Eagles' greatest strength lies in bringing others together and in inviting the world to join the Eagles football team as they create autism awareness and celebrate an impact that resonates globally. Championed by the Eagles chairman, CEO Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles Autism Challenge aims to fund innovative research, drive scientific breakthroughs, and provide vital resources to shift awareness to action. The foundation also focuses on research of the financing about autism, raising awareness, and implementing real-world solutions for children with autism, such as creating state-of-the-art sensory rooms at NFL stadiums. The players are actively involved on and off the field. The Eagles Autism Foundation website offers valuable information and videos, including an impact video showcasing the sensory room and related news stories. Thank you, Philadelphia Eagles, for being champions for inclusion. You are not only Super Bowl champs, but you are champions in the heart and in the fight towards inclusion and promoting inclusion. And we appreciate you being true winners both on and off the field. The link for that story will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. And that is it for our Edufaith inspirational story. Now let's shift to our dates to remember for the month of May. For the month of May, we want to recognize Asian and Pacific American Heritage Month, Military Appreciation Month, National Mental Health Awareness Month, National Physical Fitness and Sports Month, ALS Awareness, Arthritis Awareness, Apraxia Awareness, Asthma and Allergy Awareness, Better Speech and Hearing, Brain Tumor Awareness, Cystic Fibrosis Awareness, Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, Hepatitis Awareness, High Blood Pressure Education, Huntington's Disease Awareness, Lupus Awareness, Lyme Disease Awareness, Mobility Awareness, Pediatric Stroke Awareness, Multiple Sclerosis Awareness in Canada, American Stroke Month, Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month, which is May 15th through June 15th, and National Accessibility Awareness Week, May 25th to 31st, which is recognized and celebrated in Canada. When we move towards our specific dates, May 1st is National College Decision Day. May 1st is also National School Principals Day. Celebrating our principals and our leaders. I hope you all have a wonderful day. May 2nd is School Hero Lunch Day. May 5th through the 9th is National Teacher Appreciation Week. Thank a teacher. Thank you, teachers, for all that you do. You are in my heart, and we celebrate you and the leaders. Thank you, and let's make sure that we celebrate our teachers during Teacher Appreciation Week, May 5th through the 9th. We love you, teacher. May 6th is World Asthma Day. May 7th is National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. May 7th is also National School Nurses Day. Let's celebrate our school nurses. Thank you for all that you do. May 8th is World Ovarian Cancer Awareness Day. May 9th is School Communications Day. May 11th is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. We celebrate you. May 12th is International Awareness Day for Chronic Immunological and Neurological Diseases. May 15th is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. May 18th is National Speech Pathologist Day. Celebrating our speech pathologists. Thank you for all that you do. And we end May 26th with Memorial Day. I also want to recognize a special date. May 22nd, my youngest son, Christian Cotton, will be graduating from high school. Christian, I am so proud of you, and I am looking forward to seeing you walk across the stage and celebrate you as you graduate from high school. So congratulations, Christian Cotton. Mommy loves you. Those are all our dates to remember for the month of May. For essential news, we have a couple of news stories that we're going to dive into. Supreme Court strengthens educational rights for students with disabilities. In March 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling that significantly elevated the standard for special education services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The decision now requires public schools to offer educational programs that are reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in the light of the child's circumstances, moving beyond the previous ambiguous standard of providing some educational benefit. This ruling underscores the importance of individualized, meaningful progress for students with disabilities, thereby reinforcing the civil rights within educational settings. The court's decision stemmed from a case involving a student with learning disabilities whose school had provided minimal support, resulting in only negligible academic gains. Disability rights advocates hailed the ruling as a powerful reminder to school districts about the legal obligation to deliver genuinely effective individualized education programs. This landmark case sets a precedent that is likely to transform how special education services are evaluated and implemented nationwide. And that source came from the PBS NewsHour. The next story, executive order requires overhaul of school discipline policies. In April 2025, a newly issued executive order mandated that schools nationwide revise their district policies to tackle long-standing disparities impacting students with disabilities. The order focuses on eliminating exclusionary practices such as suspensions and expulsions that disproportionately affect students in special education. It also encourages the adoption of restorative justice practices and trauma-informed care to minimize punitive disciplinary measures. This executive order follows years of advocacy from disability rights groups who have pointed out that existing discipline policies often criminalize behavior with a student's disability instead of offering necessary support. The order instructs the U.S. Department of Education to deliver guidance by the fall of 2025 and urges districts to involve families and communities in policymaking in the process. Advocates believe this initiative could significantly help dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline affecting students with disabilities. And that story came from the Council for Exceptional Children. The next story is Executive Order aims to integrate AI into classrooms. In April 2025, President Trump signed the Executive Order Advancing Artificial Intelligence, AI in American Youth, aimed at establishing the U.S. as a leader in AI. This initiative encourages early exposure to AI concepts and aligns workforce development with technology trends. It creates a White House task force on AI education and introduces the Presidential AI Challenge to honor students and educator achievements. The order promotes public-private partnerships for AI learning resources, supports AI training for teachers through federal grants, and fosters AI-related registered apprenticeships. It also encourages dual enrollment programs for high school students to earn post-secondary AI credentials, all designed to build an AI-ready workforce. Special education advocates view this as a chance to improve personalized learning for students with disabilities, but they stress that AI integration must enhance, not replace, skilled educators. The Council for Exceptional Children underscores the need for inclusive design and ethical considerations in AI deployment as they monitor its impact on special education and advocate for diverse learners' needs. The next story is the NCLD advocates for educator grant programs amid legal challenges. In April 2025, the National Center for Learning Disabilities joined forces with several organizations to file an amicus brief with the Supreme Court aiming to safeguard federal grant programs that train special education teachers. Brief supports the U.S. Department of Education's authority to fund initiatives that prepare educators to address the needs of students with disabilities. The move comes in response to the legal challenge threatening the continuation of these vital programs, which are essential for cultivating a well-trained special education teacher workforce. NCLD highlighted that cutting or limiting these grants would directly impact millions of students who depend on skilled educators for access to inclusion and high-quality education. The organization warned that without these supports, many districts, especially those in rural and undersourced areas, will struggle to recruit and retain qualified special education teachers. Though the case is still pending before the court, advocacy groups are intensifying their effort for a favorable outcome. And that came from the National Center for Learning Disabilities. The next story, a contentious proposal from the Trump campaign in early April 2025 suggests transferring oversight special education from the U.S. Department of Education to the Department of Health and Human Services. Proponents argue that HHS could more effectively meet the therapeutic and support needs of students with disabilities. However, educators and disability advocates warn that this shift may undermine the U.S. Department of Education's capacity to enforce civil rights protections and adhere to IDEA funding requirements. Critics contend that such a restructuring would create service silos, emphasizing medical approaches over educational access and inclusion. Multiple national organizations, including the Council for Exceptional Children and the National PTA, have expressed their concerns that this move could weaken accountability measures and lead to inconsistencies in state oversight. While the proposal has yet to make progress in Congress, it has sparked significant debate within education and policy discussions. And that is it for our essential news. Those links, those stories will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. And let's shift to the next part of the podcast. Now it's time for Essential Knowledge. For Essential Knowledge, I'm picking up on part 2 of part 1's podcast, where I am providing a recap of the Council for Exceptional Children's Conference and the collaborative session that I was a part of with 2 other ladies, Randi Stone and Elizabeth Zagata. And the title of the session that we led was Essential Tips for Leadership, Navigating Disability Compliance and Reading Policy Through Sensemaking Strategies. And with that, the last podcast, I spoke specifically on my portion of the training and of the presentation. And for this part, now we're going to hear more about the topics related to for compliance and reading policy through sense-making strategies. And I have 2 special guests, Elizabeth Zagata and Randi Stone, and they're going to present their portions of that collaborative panel that we presented at the 2025 Council for Exceptional Children's Conference. Just as a reminder that the outcomes included enhancing understanding and build self-advocacy of Section 5 and special education fundamentals, including law, leadership, coordinated practices, IEP 504 plans, and processes for diverse learners receiving services under Section 504 IDEA. The second 2 outcomes were to understand the current dyslexia policy landscape in the United States, including the research based on state-level dyslexia laws, and then identifying collaborative pathways within schools and districts for professional development that supports educator sense-making around changing reading policy. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is a picture of me and the ladies as we got ready to present before the conference. As I shift to introductions, I wanted to share this photo. This is a photo of us together right before we presented at the conference. This was a wonderful collaborative session. Our first guest is Dr. Elizabeth Zagata. Elizabeth Zagata is a special education systems improvement specialist at WestEd, where she supports states and districts in assessing and improving their special education policies, procedures, and practices. Before joining WestEd, Zagata was an Office of Special Education Program Scholar with the National Center for Leadership and Intensive Intervention. Over her 15-year teaching career in both general and special education, she taught in large and small districts in urban, suburban, and rural settings, covering every grade from preschool to high school. She currently serves as an adjunct faculty member teaching courses on diagnostic assessment and special education law at both Sacred Heart University and the University of Connecticut, where she completed her PhD in educational psychology. Her research focuses on the intersection of literacy and assessment with policy and special education law. And without further ado, I will have my colleague and co presenter, Elizabeth Zagata. Thank you for joining us, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. And it was really great to present with you at CEC.
Thank you. I really had a blast, and I discussed that in the last podcast. And I'm still reeling from the wonderful event and the wonderful collaboration with you, both you and Randy.
Yeah, ditto. We were a great team.
Yes, dream team. I agree. All right, let's go ahead and start with our first question. This first question lies under dyslexia laws at the federal level. How do federal laws, like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504, protect students with dyslexia? And it's a two-part question. And are there key differences between them?
Yes, yes. So that's a common question, the distinction between the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and then Section 504. And I know you're a real expert on that and have even written some great books about it. But IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, focuses on special education services, specifically providing a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, in the least restrictive environment. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in settings or activities that receive federal funding. The difference would be that IDEA has a really detailed eligibility process that requires both a qualifying disability in a listed category and the need for specially designed instruction. So, one of those categories is specific learning disability. And in the regulations, dyslexia is listed as an example of a specific learning disability. Section 504, on the other hand, focuses on a disability that substantially limits a major life activity. So, in a school setting, Section 504 provides students access to accommodations based on their disability. A student with dyslexia who has a 504 plan might, for example, receive extra time on assignments or access to audiobooks. So that's some examples of the difference between the two.
I love that. And in part one of the podcast, when I presented my portion of the presentation, I also discussed and touched on those federal supports for students with disabilities under Section 504 and IDEA. So that tied in perfectly with what you're doing in the work that you're doing as far as dyslexia and how it aligns with the federal law. So that's a perfect tie in.
Oh, good. Great.
All right, let's look at the state levels. Why do dyslexia laws vary so much from state to state? And what impact does this have on students' access to services?
Yeah, so great question. If we're thinking about dyslexia laws at the state level, we travel back in time to 2010. There were only 4 states that had dyslexia laws. We've jumped forward to today, and every state but Hawaii has at least one dyslexia law, and that includes the District of Columbia. It also includes my home state of Connecticut, which has passed 6 dyslexia laws since 2014. We know that states differ in lots of ways, and dyslexia laws are just one example. In some ways, actually, there's actually a lot of overlap in the types of provisions that states have in their dyslexia laws. And that's because the groups that were advocating for these laws typically had a shared policy platform. So, for example, Decoding Dyslexia is a grassroots advocacy organization that has chapters in every state, and they have 5 clearly stated policy goals. So, a lot of these advocates relied on that platform. Similarly, the International Dyslexia Association also has chapters in most states, and they also have policy goals and an advocacy toolkit. But even with those shared policy agendas across states, there are still differences between states regarding their dyslexia laws. And that's really because education is primarily a state and local responsibility. So there is some autonomy in how these entities design and implement their education systems. Another example, some states use the International Dyslexia Association's definition of dyslexia, and other states use their own definition. Some
Mm.
states require students to be screened for dyslexia and for parents to be notified of those results, while others do not. Other differences between states include how their dyslexia laws address teacher preparation and training, and what kind of intervention they require for students after they're identified. And I'll just give one more example about the differences between states. For several years, many students with dyslexia in Texas received services under Section 504 instead of IDEA. So, really getting at your previous question of that distinction. That has changed recently, but you can see how before that could really be problematic if children moved from state to state. For those of you who really want to dive into the weeds on this and learn more about different states' laws and requirements, I do have an open access resource document on literacy legislation, and we can share that with the show links.
Perfect, perfect. It's amazing how each state has something different, and some
Yes.
states have numerous dyslexia laws. That's very informative and very I've learned a lot just re-listening to everything. Wow.
Yeah, it's quite a landscape out there, and it's ever changing too. States are still passing dyslexia laws and also reading laws, so it's really constantly evolving.
Do you feel like it amped up quite a bit within the last maybe 2 years?
I would say most recently, the shift has really moved to state level reading laws, often known as science of reading laws. I would say
Right.
that's really more the focus now. Some of those do address dyslexia, but most of those have more of a focus on sort of that tier one reading instruction.
So it's just a global support for reading across the board. Across the
Exactly,
country.
exactly. Looking at issues around curriculum, teacher training, multi-tiered systems of support. A lot really around the that kind of tier one core reading instruction.
Perfect, perfect. All right, so let's talk about research on state level dyslexia laws. Based on research, what trends have emerged in states, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit. So, what trends have emerged in states with strong dyslexia laws regarding student outcomes and literacy rates?
Yeah, another great question. And truth be told, it's actually one that we're still trying to answer. Most of these laws are still relatively new. So we just really don't have a robust body of data correlating with student outcomes yet. And we really haven't had many evaluative studies. But
Hmm.
from the few studies that did analyze outputs and outcomes, we really haven't yet seen impacts to overall rates of specific learning disability identification. There was one study that did show that Black and Latino students were less likely to be identified with dyslexia, as were students who were in schools that had greater rates of students experiencing reading difficulty. There was another study that showed that teacher knowledge around dyslexia is increasing, but teacher confidence is not. The bottom line is we definitely need more research. But that said, many states, as I just was saying, really have passed these state level reading laws. Again, as I said before, also known as science of reading laws. And they're
Hmm.
really looking at improving overall reading instruction and outcomes for all students, not just students identified with dyslexia. From a research standpoint, that means it's going to be kind of complicated to try and tease out the specific impacts of these different policies, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Okay, okay. And I'm sure there is more to come, and it's not going away
For sure.
at all. All right, so let's dive and shift to dyslexia laws and dispute resolution. We talked about federal laws, we talked about state laws, we summarized the various state level dyslexia laws. What are some common challenges families face when advocating for dyslexia accommodations, and how can they navigate the dispute resolution process effectively?
Yeah, the optimistic side of me would like to think that the prevalence of these state level dyslexia laws has really helped raise awareness such that, more students are being appropriately identified and supported. That said, I recognize that isn't always the case. So, first and foremost, I think it's important for families and educators to have accurate information. So, I would point them to the National Center for Improving Literacy, or NCIL, which is a federally funded center that provides free evidence based resources for improving outcomes for students with literacy related disabilities, including dyslexia. I also think it's important for families and schools to foster positive partnerships by keeping the focus on the student. And I know, that's something you talk a lot about. The
Mhm.
Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution and Special Education, or CADRE, CADRE is that acronym. That's another federally funded center that helps families and schools prevent and resolve special education disputes. They also have just a trove of resources to support these collaborative relationships. And then they also have resources for families and districts that are navigating disputes.
Wow, that is really, really good. What was the first one? The National Center.
National Center for Improving Literacy, and the acronym is NCIL. And
AI.
then the second one is the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution and Special Education, or CADRE, CADRE is their acronym.
Awesome. I think these are great resources for parents. As I said before, I'm learning quite a bit, and I will make sure that I have these resources on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, tips for teachers and leaders and everyone else who's listening, because we want to make sure that we are supportive across the board for all parents, leaders, and teachers, and trying to make this world a better place of inclusion for everyone. Parents, what
Yeah,
are
I
the
think yeah, key signs, right?
yeah,
What should
yes,
parents
yes,
look for?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. As we shift to parents, what are the key signs of dyslexia that parents should look for, and how can they advocate for early intervention?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to reference both that National Center for Improving Literacy and the International Dyslexia Association. They both have really helpful lists of common signs of dyslexia at different ages. But broadly speaking, for young children, we want to watch for difficulties with letter recognition and naming, difficulties with rhyming, and difficulties with manipulating sounds and words. And then when we think about elementary age children, we're watching for difficulty with spelling and
Mhm.
decoding. Often for these children with dyslexia, reading is slow, it's labored, and it's inaccurate. And in fact, many children with dyslexia avoid reading just because it's so hard. Families should stay informed and then share any concerns they have with the school. And if the school doesn't respond, families do have the right to request a formal evaluation under IDEA to determine if their child is eligible for special education.
They sure can, and I love that. And that's what I teach and preach on here. Love it. All right. What about our educators? What are some research backed strategies teachers could use to support students with dyslexia in the classroom?
Yeah, again, a lot of these state level laws have mandated teacher training, both pre service teachers and in service teachers. I'm hopeful that teachers have just a greater awareness of dyslexia in general. But again, there are some great resources out there, including, like I just said, the National Center for Improving Literacy and International Dyslexia Association. But thinking about, what teachers can do, we know that children with dyslexia require explicit and systematic instruction and intervention in decoding and encoding. But we also want to make sure these children have access to complex grade level text to develop their vocabulary and comprehension skills. I just really urge educators to be mindful of providing both that specially designed instruction in literacy, specifically decoding and encoding, so that children with dyslexia can become better readers and spellers, but also making sure that those children still have access to grade level text and content through such things like read alouds and use of accommodations like text to speech and audiobooks. Really a both and not an either or.
Perfect. So, professional development and making sure that you have access to resources.
Exactly.
All right. And then, how can policymakers push for stronger dyslexia laws and funding at the state and federal levels?
Yeah, so if I think back to, the statistic I shared before that virtually all states have dyslexia laws already, I think policymakers should really learn more about how the implementation of these laws are going.
Mhm.
I think it would be helpful if they talk to teachers, talk to administrators, talk to students, and talk to families. Look at the data on student outcomes, and then consider if policy adjustments need to be made. And then, we know policies are only as good as the resources behind them. So, policymakers really need to make sure these laws aren't unfunded mandates, but that districts and schools really do have access to the resources they need to support kids. And then, if you think back to that overlap I was talking about between dyslexia and reading laws, states really need to ensure that new resources, supports, and requirements for addressing dyslexia and reading laws are aligned, while considering how these laws may impact already existing state efforts. And then thinking about things like third grade retention policies, those should really account for students with disabilities. Teacher preparation requirements should be consistent across reading laws and dyslexia laws. And then screening processes, both for dyslexia and reading difficulties, should be streamlined. And then I'll just say that I also need to think about, I think we also need to think about whether we're adequately supporting students who have other reading difficulties outside of dyslexia. So, an example of that would be developmental language disorder. And we need to ask how these laws are adequately supporting our multilingual learners. So, the bottom line is that literacy legislation should prioritize evaluation to ensure policies are really improving reading and writing outcomes for all students, including those with disabilities. And that can be done by defining clear success metrics, adjusting policies when necessary, and providing adequate fiscal support for implementation. So, we've definitely got work to do.
Yes, we do. And that big one is that fiscal part, the money, the money, the money.
Yes.
And then I didn't mention this, but let's talk about leaders.
Mm.
What are some things that school leaders can do to help support dyslexia?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Most of the training requirements for these laws are really looking at teachers and special ed teachers, general ed teachers, reading consultants, reading coaches. But I'm not really familiar with a lot of them that address specific training for leaders. But certainly that's important. So I think when possible, school leaders should jump in on trainings around dyslexia and reading with their teachers so they can be aware of what's the information being presented, how can they support teachers in growing their knowledge and serving these kids. So I think just for leaders to stay informed, just like teachers have to stay informed, I think is really helpful. And then to be mindful of some of the extra add-ons for these laws that teachers have to navigate. So things like screening, things like informing parents, things like having intervention systems setting up, a lot of that would fall, under the guidance of school leaders. So they need to be aware of those requirements as well.
I love it because school leaders are the instructional leaders of the programs and school programs. So leaders, you have to make sure that you're versed in everything that's happening at the school so you can support not just students with dyslexia, but all students throughout the building and foster that collaborative, positive, inclusive culture.
Very well said.
All right. Dr. Elizabeth, is there anything else that we did not discuss that you feel like we need to bring to the forefront of this conversation?
No, I mean, I really appreciated the intersection between the content that you shared and the content that Randy shared, and, really how we all came at this from slightly different angles, but really had, a lot of overlap in sort of the trends we were seeing and the kinds of information we were sharing. I think when schools can do that, like I said, when they can keep that shared vision on really helping kids and thinking about what's best for kids, that really leads to the best outcomes.
I agree. I agree. And then one more time, I will type all the resources, but give us one more rundown of all those websites and the information that you presented, the free
Sure.
resources.
Well, the one resource is the first one that I mentioned several times is the National Center on Improving Literacy, and their website is improvingliteracy.org. And then the other one was the International Dyslexia Association, and their website is dyslexiaida.org. And then the other one I think I mentioned, was Cadre, the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. And their website is Cadre Works. So CADRE works, WORKS.org. They've got a lot of great information on dispute resolution. And then my resource document that really gives a lot of different resources if you want to learn more about state laws on reading and on dyslexia. That's probably too long to spell out in the podcast, but I think you can link it with the show notes. It's an open access document that's available to anybody.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And as I mentioned, I will have all of these resources on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page for anyone to come and view those resources, access those resources, because it's all about supporting our inclusive students, all of our students, and making sure that students get what they need across the board in all their classes and in education. Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. Our next guest, Dr. Randi Stone, is a passionate literacy leader and first generation college graduate committed to advancing evidence based, culturally affirming instruction. Beginning her career as a pre K teacher in her hometown of Chicago, she has served in various instructional leadership roles, including director of instruction, literacy coach, and now as a professional learning specialist at Really Great Reading. Dr. Stone holds advanced degrees from Dominican University, Harvard's Graduate School of Education and American University, where her doctoral research focused on culturally responsive implementation of science of reading and foreign policies. As an adjunct at American University, she teaches urban education and school justice, advocating for equity and teacher preparation. She has presented her work at major conferences such as the World Literacy Summit at Oxford University, SWXX EDU, Council for Exceptional Children, and the International Dyslexia Association. Without further ado, welcome Dr. Randi Stone. Randy,
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
super excited. Randy kicked off the third leg of the presentation that we presented in March at the CEC Conference. And what we want to do is recap her section and all the educator sense making, a need for collaborative pathways for professional development. How does collaboration influence national, district, and classroom professional development?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for starting with this question around collaboration. My research really centered the role collaboration can and could play in uplifting best practices, specifically uplifting culturally responsive teaching methods that are in line with the science of reading. And we know there's a huge push for science of reading aligned instruction in our country right now. And so thinking about how does collaboration influence all of these levels of professional development? I think right now it's my hope that collaboration could be a key driver in how PD becomes more effective for teachers. And where I started this journey with the research was asking teachers in the district I was located in, so Mid-Atlantic region, a very large urban school district. And one of the findings I came across in my initial needs assessment was that folks, specifically these literacy coaches I was interviewing, often felt the PD they were attending, even though it was on science of reading related instruction, was often disconnected from the needs of their school building. And a common theme that came up was we just want to have time to talk to one another. We just want to be able to sit and process this information. And so locally, we had a dyslexia bill passed that mandated teacher training around dyslexia laws, teacher training around structured literacy. And all of this is happening in the background of a lot of school buildings still just moving away from guided reading practices, from balanced literacy practices. And so, in many cases, these trainings aligned with some of that curricular change and maybe supported some of the instructional changes, but in some cases, it's just very overwhelming. And so, what I heard from folks was they wanted time to talk to one another, to talk to other literacy coaches, to other literacy specialists, to just make sense of one, what was being mandated in terms of their instruction. But then this other piece and this other finding that really came through was they wanted time to really think through the data they were collecting in regards to the screeners they were mandated to, have in their buildings. And so locally, we use Dibbles, and something that's used fairly wide across the country, especially in this region. And there's a lot of data and a lot of great points that lives in those screeners. But what do you do with all of that? And then what do you do with all of that on top of foundations data or letters data or your intervention, your Wilson intervention data, right? And so um, what I heard was that there was a need for time to talk. There was need for time to talk and collaborate. And the piece I'll say around what this means for the district is that I would argue that if you put funds and just support back into your literacy specialists, your literacy leaders, be it coaches or teacher leaders who are already well trained, give them the tools to lead these collaborative spaces, give them the tools to lead sense making, which I can talk about a little bit further in our conversation. If we empower the experts in the building, we do not have to wait for another person to come help us out. Because often that person who comes to do PD unto others has no idea what the context of that district is or the context of that building. And so a quick example there was one literacy coach who was in a bilingual school. And so, one classroom was full Spanish immersion, one classroom was predominantly English speaking classroom. And you're looking at a school model that is, you'll see in a lot of places. And they were adapting and creating their own materials because there was limited resources provided for them, right? And so they were responding to the culture of their students. They were responding to the needs of their students, but they had something built in their building that was effective and useful, yet it wasn't being shared across the district in a mandated sort of, I don't even want to say mandated, but in a way that everyone had access to. So now you're telling me there's folks all across different buildings, sort of working in silos, creating amazing things that respond to the needs of, some of the most marginalized kids in our country. And we have no pathway for sharing. That to me just has always been sort of an issue where we're spending a ton of money, resources, time thinking about other opportunities or how to grow when there's just so much good happening in these spaces that could be shared.
I love that. And you are so right. What I gathered from you was teachers need time to use the data, process the data, collaborate, and then use what's within to help support their students. The next question, what is the educator's most significant challenge in accessing and applying high quality professional development?
I mean, there's so many. I think the biggest thing comes to time, right? Even with my
Yes.
research, the intervention I co-created with my participants, right? I asked them, what are the topics you want to be able to discuss as we come together? And what's the best pathway for this? And ultimately, it was an online space. And we came up with this idea, but it's something that we see online, right? Look at Facebook. I'm trying to think, the You Fly Facebook page. Oh my gosh, the amount of updates, people responding, right? And so we know all these literacy curriculums, they have these online sort of unmoderated, some are moderated spaces where folks are coming together to make sense of things in this online forum. And so when we think about what sense making is, it's really taking information and being able to like interact with it, being able to take that. I would argue you need another person or some sort of interactive modality in which you're taking that information in, either repeating it, practicing it, when we think about instruction, modeling it, getting feedback, and really just spending time with that new learning before you go out and you're with students, right? Doing the thing. I think we see a lot of things that are like, here's the lesson plan, go and do it. And it's like, wait, I'm changing how I'm teaching. Now I have to do it this way. And what does this mean in terms of a child's brain development, right? There's so many layers to how we teach. And we often just focused on, how quickly can we get them the content so they can get out the door. And part of sense making that I wanted to see was like, well, conversation, a back and forth. I have this question regarding how do I respond to a student who's dropping their EDs at the end of their words? Why might they be doing this? Here's some context. How do I adapt my, scope and sequence to meet their needs? And so we had this online board in which the coaches would just talk to one another, right? And it almost seems so simple, it's almost silly, but it's like, no, we don't really have that opportunity in like a formal way, or it's typically highly protocoled. And I'm like guilty of this. Like, here's a 10-minute protocol to sort of get to your next steps and identify what you're going to do tomorrow in your classroom. And there was none of that in this space. Questions, answers, responses, further questioning. Now, I'll say again, you look at any like Facebook or online space, teachers are out there doing this and they're doing it without their district leader. They're doing it without their principal. They're doing it without their coach. People are trying to make sense because I would argue our teachers love their students. They want to figure out the best way to do things. And so again, I go back to like, we got to just leverage that energy. And the coaches I worked with in this research, they reported at the end that a lot of them felt like they had a community, and we never came together in person, to be clear, right? Like it was all online. I think there's some easy takeaways from my findings that could be implemented at every district.
I love that as well. And just taking away and recapping. So building efficacy for the teachers, so and then giving them time,
Hmm.
time to process. And then efficacy is the confidence to go back and redeliver.
Yeah, and I think the other piece with the district is you're just thinking, what online tool are you using in which folks could come together to share materials? Again, it all seems so simple that I'm like, I can't believe, and there are times where I've seen it come to life in the districts I've been in, either a SharePoint and it has all the resources, but it's typically owned by like an outside central office sort of disconnected person. And maybe they're doing site visits, maybe they're going to schools, there's some support there, but you don't need to rely on that middle person. Just give those folks who are in the buildings the opportunity and the time to sit in that space and say, hey, I use this protocol. You want to try it out? Oh, you have a student who's struggling with this. We made this sound map over in my building. We found it works really well. Here you go. With some of this research, the district gave me the space and time to do that in one of our final literacy PD sessions for the year a few years ago. And so it was a sharing session, right? Just very simple, but I walked away with actual things I could go use and, just got time to process new learning. And we underestimate that a lot.
Agree totally. And it's very, very empowering. And it's empowering to the teachers too
Mhm.
to have that.
Yep.
What does research suggest about the impact of collaborative professional development on teaching and learning?
I'll ask the question to that with teaching and learning of students or with the thinking about the learning aspect of those adults, those educators.
I would say those adults, because
Yeah.
we're talking about professional development and then the collaboration part of it, which is what you're talking about in your research.
Yeah. So what we see in the research is that professional learning, it rarely extends beyond silos of teams, either at school sites, within district content teams, even, like you might have stratified designations of like, okay, I'm going to have all my pre-K teachers, I'm going to have all my instructional leaders from these buildings. These are in larger districts, right? And so even though professional learning as a whole is becoming more collaborative, and I would argue we would say probably have found ways to do that even better online post COVID. We're still not seeing, I think I've sort of named this, these exchanges across school buildings, right? And so there's very limited research around this, but I'll say Wolfen and Spitzer was sort of the space where I found my hope around what is possible, and they looked at coaching teams. And so there were coaches across buildings who came together as a team, and those teams collaborated across boundaries and school districts. And they were the vehicles for bridging understanding and learning, right? So they were able to strengthen like general professional learning for their district because they were able to come together and work together. Instead of me, if we take like a scenario, I'm in a building and I'm the pre-K3 literacy specialist. I'm supposed to be this expert across this wide span. And anybody who's taught that span knows third grade is very different than pre-K. And maybe my background is in that, and this is actually my background is in early childhood education. When it came to teaching comprehension skills and really even thinking about students struggling with decoding in third grade, that is a very, I don't want to say different because the skills are all intertwined, but there's a level, a depth of understanding that third grade brain that it's going to look different than pre-K. Is the actual expectation I am an expert across all those grade levels? Like, yeah, at the end of the day, that is how we function in most school systems. Why wouldn't I have a partnership or a collaborative sort of engagement where I could call on somebody who's really good at 3 through 5, right? Like, I just think there's a lot of missed opportunities in this belief. And we see this so heavily in elementary schools that you just have to be good at everything. And it drives me crazy because why can't I just be really good at the thing that I know? And that body of research, if I think about pre-K to 2 and thinking about all of the things that go into literacy in those ages, I sometimes just can't think about what's going on in third, fourth, fifth grade. So why wouldn't I be able to call on a partner who's at the building down the street and they're really good at that? And I can collaborate with them on my next PD session rather than spinning my wheels trying to come up with something new myself or calling in, an outside provider. And so I think school districts are really able to rely on these leaders if they can identify them, support them, and then build the system, the mechanism for collaboration.
That is empowering. That's incredible. And I agree with the missed opportunities. Also agree with the coaching. And as a
Mhm.
former elementary teacher, I agree with trying to juggle everything, trying to teach
Yep.
everything instead of being good at one particular thing.
Yeah.
Totally agree. How can schools and districts create sustainable professional collaboration and growth pathways?
I think that comes down to like long one prioritizing this, right? And I would say it starts with simply engaging your educators, your literacy leaders, and seeing how they feel around collaboration and having time back to talk to each other. A theme that came out of my research was, what do we do when collaboration just feels like one more thing? And it's like, well, what is the thing that could be replaced? And it feels like nothing. Like everything is so important. And yet we have figured out a way in many districts to mandate professional development days, right? Like we have the time on a lot of calendars to have these PD days. How do we ensure they are engaging and that we're relying on the folks we know who can do the work to lead collaboration? And I think it just comes down to planning and looking internally for the folks you need to really lead the work. And I think in terms of sustainability, it's what are the easiest online systems we can do to use to collaborate with one another? Is there just a Teams or a Slack or something where you can like chat with folks throughout the day if you have a question come up around literacy? Again, I'm like, people are on Facebook doing this, people are on TikTok, or we're on TikTok, different forms of social media. There's time, right? It's happening. So, what's the like snazzy sort of tech way we could implement in schools? And I think that's a much harder question that I do not know how to answer anything related to that specific issue around technology.
I do love the way that you're bringing technology into it. I think technology is really important, and I think that it has provided easier access for us instead of the traditional in person, scheduling a meeting, waiting for people to get there. So I love that you're pushing technology because that is a more attainable and simpler way to just access and get what you need and collaborate versus trying to schedule a traditional meeting, sitting down, planning, and all of these
Exactly.
things.
Yep.
I love the way that you're prioritizing tech and thinking outside of the box and thinking
Mhm.
about ways that with teachers can be engaged in collaboration and growth. I love
Yep.
that part. How can parents support and advocate for substantial professional development opportunities for educators?
I would argue that there's no better time than now to stay informed with funding policies in your states, in your cities, in your regions. We just saw in February, I'm like, what month is it? In February, $600 million in cuts to professional development grants across the country from the DOE. So we know this is an area where the cuts that we're seeing, it's not just this Department of Education is being cut, and that's that. It's trickling down to the funding that's going to states that ensures folks are getting trained on a lot of these materials because of, you know, a disagreement or a misunderstanding of language that is with our professional development. But there is no better time than now to just see and really take in the sheer amount of money that is being lost to support teachers and educators. It's astounding. We saw at AU a program that was cut, claimed that it was, to DEI or along the lines of being, yeah, still just one of these things that feels all very unclear as to exactly why programs are being targeted when these programs are supporting the development of people who care about our children, and folks who want to dedicate their lives to a profession that is often under attack for so many nonsensical reasons. So I would say start by staying informed on the funding that is hopefully still trickling down into your states, into your districts, into your cities, and consider ways you can continue to advocate for continued funding for schools, because a lot of that funding goes into ensuring your child's teacher knows how to teach the thing they've been hired to teach, which it's very important. So stay informed and advocate.
Parents, you heard it. You have to stay informed, advocate, watch the news, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask.
Mhm.
What is one key strategy teachers? It's a two-part question, and school leaders could use to foster a culture of collaboration and professional learning. So maybe let's talk about teachers first and then shift to leaders.
I think in terms of if I'm a teacher and I'm just trying to collaborate with, if I'm new and I'm trying to get to know the other teachers on my team, it's asking for those resources, right? You're not even new. Say you're a veteran teacher, seeing what other teachers are doing. I think generally having an attitude of inquiry is a good place. Walking in your school, closing your door, and just doing your thing in your classroom, it's not sustainable, right? I've never, as a, in building for 15 years, and the best teachers I saw were the ones sharing, were the ones asking, were the ones creating, but never closing their door and locking out their teammates. I think just having that openness and really that sense of inquiry is so important. I think about a teacher I worked with at my last school, and she was always running up and down the hall with her ideas, sharing copies. But really, when it came to like identifying specific skills for what kids needed, like she would ask questions and she would ask other people what they were doing, and then she would get the materials for the kid who needed that differentiated passage, right? It was really an attitude that went beyond her really great skill set. She was generally somebody who was helpful and asked questions. So I think that, like, if nothing else is going well in your school building, be that person and inspire other people to be that person. And I think school leaders, the one thing I will say is, do not plan your agenda to be the whole 60 minutes. Do not plan it. If you have 30 minutes with teachers, do not plan it up until that last minute. Give them 5, 10, right? The longer you have, give them more time. Give them time to talk to each other. They will, for the most part, stay focused, especially if the outcome has to do with students, if there's a data point involved, if they're looking at something. Give teachers time to talk and ask each other questions. Think about this all the time with building agendas. You do not need to fill every minute. We need to respect adults' abilities to like converse and collaborate and make sense of things without us micromanaging every moment. So that's my big takeaway for school leaders.
Perfect. For my teachers, be the light, be the leader, and no silos.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for my leaders, allow time. Don't
Yes.
fill up the space. Allow some teacher reflection,
Mhm.
collaboration, and some autonomy for the teachers in those professional spaces.
Yeah.
Perfect. Randy, is there anything else that you want to close out? Anything sticking out, or you want to leave with the listeners?
I think that from all this research, and my biggest takeaway, and I try to implement it wherever I go, is just taking the time to slow down a bit. I think we live in a world, obviously, it's moving so fast. We know all these things, but especially when it comes to learning for students, for the adults, for leaders, how are we just giving each other the time, the space, the respect to say, okay, take 10 minutes and just read that, digest it, talk. No, without an agenda point for everything we do. How do we just protect time to make sense of all of the different things we have on our plate? Just take time, protect time, make sure it's part of everything you do when you plan for our educators.
Great talk, great talking points. Everything is awesome. I'm going to shift, and your contact information, we'll have it on the Essentials YouTube page. Are there any resources or any links or anything that may stick out that you might want to refer parents, teachers, or leaders? And if you don't have anything, that's fine. Just wanted to ask.
No, no, nothing else to point people to.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for collaboration. I've enjoyed both you and Elizabeth, and I know we're going to continue to do great things and continue to do work together. And I just think the CEC was just an awesome experience for us just to connect.
It was so awesome. Thank you for putting this all together for us.
All together for our recap of the Council for Exceptional Children's Conference, essential tips for leadership, navigating disability compliance, and reading policy through sense making. And as you see, we had three main objectives throughout the training that we presented at the CEC conference, and it was to enhance understanding and build self-efficacy of Section 504 and special education fundamentals, including laws and practices, understand the current dyslexia policy landscape in the United States, including research-based and state-level laws, and then identify collaborative pathways within schools and districts and professional development that supports educator sense making around changing reading policy. And my co-panelists, Elizabeth Zagata and Randy Stone, was here together and we're collaborating. And what we want to do is just tie up the whole presentation and provide just a few takeaways holistically about our presentation. For me, I would say ensuring that leaders, teachers, and parents all understand the services that students who have dyslexia require and understanding the appropriate accommodations, whether it is a Section 504 plan or an IEP, and then making sure that parents, you know what to ask for. You make sure that your child is assessed appropriately, and then you make sure that you collaborate with the schools to have those supports in place to support your child at home and in the school building. For my teachers, I would recommend that you make sure that you are aware of your students' abilities in the classroom. Make sure that you are reading those students' 504 and IEP plans. Make sure that you are accommodating appropriately, and then be flexible and available to adapt your instruction along the way to reinforce skills for not only students with dyslexia, but all students in your classroom to have that inclusive environment. And finally, for my leaders, we want to make sure that we support our teachers and our parents by providing a professional development, staying abreast of compliance laws, IEP policies, and Section 504 policies, and then ensuring that parents are a part of the process and having that holistic collaborative process for parents and teachers, because it really does take a village. And we want this not only for students with dyslexia, but for students with all exceptionalities holistically throughout your classrooms. We want to have that collaborative culture. Now I'm going to shift to Elizabeth. She gave the second part of the presentation. And Elizabeth, if you have any recaps, please, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thanks again, Nakia, for having Randy and I back for this podcast. It was really great to work with you both at CEC and grateful that we had this opportunity to extend our learning together. As far as the dyslexia policy, I mean, I'm just going to build off an idea you shared, which is my biggest recommendation, both for families, for educators, and for leaders, is just to stay informed. When we're talking about policy, especially dyslexia policy, and now as it broadens out into reading policy, it is a quickly changing landscape. I think my biggest recommendation is just to stay informed about what are the policies in your state, and what does that mean for the students in your school and maybe within your own family? I think staying informed is my tip number one. And also, not just staying informed about the policy, but about dyslexia and reading disabilities in general. And I know we shared some great resources for doing that. I'll also say that as a result of a lot of these state level dyslexia laws, many states have created their own dyslexia infrastructure. They might have a state office, they might have state resources. A lot of them even have their own state trainings for teachers in particular. Make sure that when you're looking for quality resources, you tap into what your own state has. And of course, then you know it's going to be aligned with your state policies. So that's my first tip. And then my second tip, I made reference to it, is just to also be informed about these wave of reading laws that have been passed, because they are now becoming more of an impact for students, both with and without disabilities. The first wave was kind of dyslexia laws, and now we're in this wave of reading laws. Certainly, there's a lot of overlap there. Just look at that dyslexia policy ecosystem. You can see some of the same factors are in play, both with the dyslexia laws and the reading laws, just to stay informed about those as well. I think those are, probably my two big takeaways.
Thank you. Awesome takeaways. Thanks, Elizabeth. We're going to shift to Randy Stone.
Thank you again. Thank you, Nakia, so much for bringing us back together. And Elizabeth, I think your points really hit home in terms of my research and what I focused on, right? I'll just echo the key point of we do want families, parents, caregivers to be informed and know that these laws have changed, that they're shifting, and that you should be receiving information around how your child is doing with their reading, right? We have screeners happening across states, across the United States that are being mandated. And this information is out there. Now, on the other end of that is really how teachers are being trained, empowered to utilize and understand these pieces of data, this information around their students. And so, one, if we want to empower families, parents, caregivers to really stay informed, we need to ensure we have the infrastructure to really empower teachers to be able to do that, right? And so my second point, and I think really what I focus on in my research, is how do we ensure teachers are making sense of this shifting policy? In the broadest sense, we are shifting from balanced literacy and sort of a guided reading approach, highly structured literacy approaches, to new curriculum in many places. And what we hear time and time again from teachers, from literacy coaches, from educators in general, is that they want more than a new curriculum. My advice to school leaders, to district leaders, is to find those experts in your building, find that reading specialist, find that letters trained specialist in your building who has the knowledge. And instead of waiting for a PD opportunity or sprinkling them in throughout the year, really push for collaborative opportunities that are sustainable and happen time and time again. Teachers and educators can come together and really make sense of what they're looking at, be it data, be it student anecdotal notes, be it new curriculum, right? Just give them the time and space to talk to one another and rely on each other and the experts you have in your building and across the district.
Perfect, perfect. These are some photos. I shared this on the last podcast of us after we presented, and just the wonderful collaboration and time that we had at the 2025 CEC Conference. And what I would like to share is some additional information. I want to share the contact information for our guest today. Dr. Elizabeth Zagata provided some links, and it'll be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, which is a resource on literacy legislation. Additional resources that Dr. Zagata shared are here, and cadreworks.org, and cadreworks.org and these additional resources will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page for you to gather those resources there. And let's shift to our words of wisdom. As we close out part 2 of the podcast, is a quote about dyslexia, and it's from one of my favorite authors, Patricia Polacco. And if you've not read any of her books, please read her books. They're children books, but they're so sweet. She wrote Thank You, Mr. Faulkner, which is a book about her. And when she was younger, she thought that she was dumb and she had issues, but come to find out she had dyslexia. And Mr. Faulkner helped her identify that need in her disability, dyslexia, and she was able to thrive and grow through Thank You, Mr. Faulkner. It's one of my favorite books. I have a copy. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Patricia Polacco. I have dyslexia, and I never did learn to read music. And I even had a problem in reading because everything was turned upside down. So I just had to draw from the lyrics and the voice that I would hear in my mind. And that is from Patricia Polacco, wonderful author of children's books. I would encourage you to grab a copy of Thank You, Mr. Faulkner, because that is an awesome book. And she has dyslexia, but she's now an author. So look at how wonderful her life turned out, thanks to a great teacher to help her find that inner strength in her. And now she's writing books. And that's it for our words of wisdom.
You've got mail.
Now it's time for our essential advice. Ask Dr. Nakia or share an inspirational story. I want to use this platform to support and spotlight fellow educators, families, and community members. If you have a question, want advice, or to share a wonderful inspirational story on this podcast, feel free to email me at edufaithforall@gmail.com. That is EDUFAITH, the number 4ALL@gmail.com. Maybe read your letter, provide advice, or share your story on this podcast. Disclaimer: all listeners should adhere to district policies, follow protocols, remain ethical, and adhere to guidelines in the best interest of children. Edufaith Essentials does not assume responsibility or is legally responsible for anyone's actions based on information provided on this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Edufaith Educational Services. Some services offered through Edufaith Consulting include consulting and advocacy for parents, consulting for educators, leaders, and school districts, college accommodation advocacy, consulting and training, advocacy in supporting individuals with college accommodations at the post-secondary level, as well as university trainings to support individuals with disabilities and services, parent education trainings, college and career coaching for students who are entering the workforce or the post-secondary college setting, business and district professional development and trainings for churches, nonprofits, businesses, districts, and communities, specializing in services for diverse learners, including students with disabilities, interventions under the multi-tier system of support, English speakers of other languages, education and leadership coaching, program development under services under IDEA, Section 504, trainings, diverse learners, and essential tips books. Feel free to go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to view all the services that Edufaith Educational Services. I want to encourage my believers to be blessed. All others, be kind, be well, and be the change. Follow Edufaith on social media. Twitter, EdufaithS. On Instagram, Edufaith 2021. On LinkedIn, Edufaith Educational Services. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting Edufaith Educational Services and the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Subscribe and follow Edufaith Essentials on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page and listen to the Edufaith Essentials podcast on all streaming platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Have a wonderful day and get essential.